Hello and welcome back to the Publisher Podcast from Media Voices. I'm Peter Houston. We're exploring the people and the products powering publishing, both through this podcast and in our adjacent weekly newsletter, which you can sign up for at voices.media. This week I'm speaking with Mel McVeigh, Head of Digital at the UK's PPA. Mel has been at the PPA for about 18 months or so, and her job is to support digital thinking within the organisation and with its members. Mel recently worked with Enders Analysis on rewriting the media playbook, a report that is both practical, helping publishers with their plans around technology investment, and provocative, challenging publishers to think about how they're going to innovate for the long term. In our conversation, Mel and I spoke about the challenges technology brings. Is the website really dying? But also the reasons to be cheerful, the trust enjoyed by magazine brands. We spoke about platforms, processes and product thinking. But first I asked Mel about working with Enders Analysis on that rewriting the media playbook report.
Working with Enders was incredible because working with Doug in particular was very much at the beginning of what's the exam question, like what are we trying to explore and then why. And for me, it was actually really simple, which was to bring customer first thinking into kind of a publisher's mindset. I mean, my background is media for the last, 25 years, but sometimes we often forget the customer. And so that's where the exam question came from, which is what is the change, regardless of our own business, the models, the headwinds, what revenue streams we have. Let's start with customer, audience, reader, however you want to define them, and look at the radical shifts in behaviour and then look at what it means for publishing and the future of media, because we're in a really incredible inflection point that is both challenging but also incredibly optimistic.
I think that's the point. I spoke to someone the other day, Katja Eggers at Media, and she said, if you look at it, we could all be like doom mongers, we could all be just sat with our head in our hands. But what's the point in that? You've got to find that optimism. And I think that comes across in this report. I think the idea of, things are changing, but change is good and opportunities come with it. Remind me of the title of the report, because you're saying about leaning into consumers, and it came straight in the first line, right?
Yeah, so consumers, creators and brands rewriting the media playbook. And I think that, audiences want content, they want great stories, they want trusted editorial. That doesn't change whether you get that in a print format, podcast or a website. But I think it's the changing way about how these stories are told and consumed that was really critical.
Yeah.
And I have always in my career liked to be a bit provocative. So it was also to push the PPA, both as an organisation and embrace more digital kind of approaches and ways of thinking. And Sarge has been incredible in embracing that, as well as the whole team, but also then make that really practical about what that means. And not forgetting that a lot of the learnings and heritage of what we've been doing doesn't actually change, right? Trusted editorial is trusted editorial. The types of content we create or how we distribute is some of the changing challenges that we have.
Why did you go to Enders? Because I could be wrong, but you've used Enders before? Have you worked with Enders before?
I have not. PPA have, I should say, a few of the reports before I joined. I just think they were a great partner in the sense of it was a collaboration from the beginning. Yeah. Doug challenged us on the exam question. So that wasn't the first brief that we sent. And I think that allowed myself and Sarge to really think about the exam question in particular. And it did get distilled after a number of conversations. And I think the beauty of that is we were always in full of alignment, but the conversation was always healthy, right? Because we were being very divergent in our thinking in the beginning, and then allowed the different threads to form into that structured narrative. And there were learnings along the way, right? Things that we didn't expect, or reinforcement of data points. And the key part of using Enders is their rigor, right? Because we wanted it not just to be a hypothetical, we think that media is going in the direction. We wanted to see data points, but multiple, so not just one, but weave together a story within that.
So what were the sort of key findings. I'm going to ask you what surprised you, but actually I know there's probably a lot in there that just you nodded along and thought, yeah, okay, that's true. We knew that.
I mean, I think that at its core, like in terms of the key findings, is that, brand is everything. And brand in the context of media is also content, trust, and identity. That, again, that hasn't changed since the beginning of time, but the way that's framed in a consumer's mind is shifting. So you can put a consumer might put their favorite content creator alongside a big media partner and both define that as trusted editorial. Being a legacy media organization isn't a guarantee to be trusted. I think off the back of that, like one of the biggest headwinds, and again, we just wanted to highlight that, and it's increasingly more evident, is that the shifting in the behavior isn't just about content, it's also about how and where they source their content. So the multiple channels, the use of agentic and AI, the fact that that's having a direct impact to search traffic, because one of our big themes were clicks are dead, long live brands, and how you have to think about the consumer, and how you need to think about the platforms in that context. Other key findings, I mean, there were many, but the one that really has resonated to me and a lot of our conversation with publishers is the role of niche. Right, so there's no real role in the way of, and if you think around your own behaviour, and including among any of my peers or people that I talk to, is that when you're looking for a topic, it's often the topic in your mind is very niche. I'm interested in X, and so I will be searching for that. Right, so I'm not necessarily looking for 5 different topics at once. And so brands that are performing well are those that really own their niche and their community. Product and tech is both the problem and solution. And digital fatigue is real. And I've had many conversations recently where, the idea that print might outlive the website is both, I mean, it makes you laugh, but like we've been talking a long time about print is dead, but actually there's a real, renaissance of people across all ages who just love, and I'll give the Sunday magazine, right? The FT magazine on the weekend, or read the paper with a cup of tea. And part of that fatigue is also within the ecosystem of a media's remit. And the last one that was not meant to be as provocative as it was, and it was purely just to kickstart the conversation, was the website is dead. I'll frame it as more dying. And it's not that it's dying, it's an essential part of a media ecosystem, but its central focus point for some brands is at risk, right? Because if you're a search-driven organization, you are experiencing headwinds that others who may have diversified may not be. So that's quite a lot in terms of the findings. And if I was to simplify it, if you know your customer, you really understand your brand and your niche, then it's really about looking at the channels and distribution mechanics that you can monetize off.
Yeah. I mean, the print thing makes me laugh because I've been banging the print drum for years. And I've been saying that print is not dead, print is changing. And all of a sudden we're having this conversation that, the website's dead. And the website's not dead, it's changing. And it's just so cyclical, I guess. And what you're saying about customers, I think is such a big deal. I think the thing that I found interesting was the idea of fragmentation. Because we've been talking again about fragmentation for a long, long time. But it's like fragmentation on steroids now. Because it's search, and it's apps, and it's people going to AI, and it's all these different things. Even print now is part of that fragmentation, because people are going so many different places. And the brand idea of that, I get it, but it's not, you can't just say, we've got a great brand. How do you deliver on that?
That is a question that we are grappling, and I am grappling with on a day-to-day basis. I think that the beauty, I mean, from a consumer and a kind of brand perspective, having an identifiable story across those channels in multiple formats, and call it liquid content for what you, as a way of describing it, is really key. And what is interesting, and actually recently Doug and I were having this conversation, if you go onto social at the moment and you kind of have this 3-second paradigm of scrolling through a feed, what stands out at the brand is the visual storytelling, a little bit like a masthead. Like, look at major publishers, the way that they're creating carousels and reels feels like an 8-page layout. There's a headline, there's the brand, there's the masthead, there's a bit of video, but it's taking a lot of visual cues from what we used to do in print. But when you are scrolling, and this is quite granular, right, as opposed to brand at a macro and a story level, you can really identify the brands, right? The New York Times looks like the New York Times. The Atlantic looks like the Atlantic. There is a design language as much as a content language that is occurring across formats so that you know whether you're on YouTube, social, or the magazine, that it belongs to a family. That is not performance marketing, right? That true shift back into what your brand represents, the stories that you tell, and actually effectively how it looks and feels. We're in a visual world, is how you stand out, because that's actually when you stop. Or, as a consumer, you then go and seek that content. Like, I know that I seek content every Monday from certain brands, right? I don't need the algorithm to showcase it to me. I have it on my to-do list to go and listen, watch content, but that is on the platform of choice, right? But it looks and feels, it's architected in a way that resonates across those platforms.
But that idea of liquid content, it can only go so far, right? You can't fire the same content into different channels. Particularly if you're thinking about design, you have to change it up, make it work for those specific channels.
100% agree, but it means that what you do, say, from with an editorial hat on, is you flip the process in your mind, which is more of a broadcast model, right? Which is, your programming or your story formats. So let's say, you have a news story that you need to share and you understand how that is commissioned, how that is written, and you create all those assets. How it's edited, cut, distributed is downstream of that, right? So you then know what it looks like on Instagram and what it feels like on YouTube. That changes the workflow. Like when I worked in media organizations in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, those teams were separate, right? You had a video team, you had the print team, you had the social team, and they were fundamentally, workflows were separated. Whereas to be a successful and an efficient media organization at the moment, you have to consolidate that, right? Your editorial teams are doing a little bit of photo, video, compiling and working with however you're structuring your design product, there's many different titles, teams, to actually distribute that content. So I actually think it can be done. I think that some of the best media organizations are doing it that way, or at least that's how it comes across to the consumer. It's distributed in the format and the platform as it needs, but it's actually architected at a program level.
So what you've just said there, it sounds sensible, but it doesn't sound easy. So I guess one of my questions is, what's been the reaction to the report from publishers? Are they looking at it and going, oh my God, what we're going to do? Are they nodding along and saying, yeah, we've already started that?
Well, it's a mixture of both. So both from the festival and beyond, a lot of it is industry sharing. Everyone wants to know what everyone's doing. And one of the beautiful parts of our industry is the openness to share learnings, whether it's about SEO, GEO, or even content. If I go back to the editorial question, a lot of it is around, how do I move? If I'm a print-based organization, do I need to train my teams? How can I train my teams? Or do I need different teams to be able to create the content that we need, right? So a lot of that is an immediate, or a very good example of that in the report, about how they've been shifting their business to a more video first. And it's integrated video, audio, visual, etc., and the written form. So there's a big editorial question about how you organize within that. And just wanting to have like experiments and seeing what the platforms can offer, TikTok, Canva, etc., or any of the kind of platforms, and who's using what. On the commercial side, it's like, how do you monetize, this content? Always. And I think that leads to both some challenges and opportunities. If you, again, look at media organizations, they're diversifying their revenue streams relevant to both the channel they're on and also what their customer wants. An example of that might be like, if you look at some of the top podcast platforms, a lot of the way that they advertise is often and very similar to what radio would have been 100 years ago, right? So presenters are doing readouts of sponsors and so forth. So this is finding ways to incrementally break up to fund that content. So that is optimizing business for performance and understanding your data, and then also creating content that resonates. The really unknown for people, and is the role of product and technology, because it can be both incredibly complex and slow down your business. The percentage of vendors and verticals and things that you are trying to manage is just overwhelming. And we just produced a market media map to try and, we're not solving that problem yet, but just to showcase the potential was always the biggest questions, like who's using what. So we created a map for that, which we've just released. But also, like, how do you design for that context? Like, if the website is dying, what does the new website experience look like? So it's a longer answer. And again, to kind of reframe it, people are asking, like, where do we begin?
Yeah.
How do we experiment? And how do we enable our teams to manage with this change? And how do we know if we're going in the right direction? So it's an ongoing conversation. So, I think overall, the feedback was really positive, and it created lots of fantastic. It wasn't like, oh, obvious, like we knew that already. It's like, okay, what next? How do we do this? Like, and actually from the festival, the buoyancy and as we started and the optimism that this is a solvable problem, not an easy one, but definitely solvable.
Just thinking about PPA for a second. Do you think that's part of PPA's job, is to start that conversation, to almost to throw the hand grenade into the middle of the room, like the website is dying thing, and just start the conversation?
I don't think it was a hand grenade. It was a provocation. I do think that PPA's role is to guide and provide, insights and knowledge sharing and a view of from my perspective, and kind of caveat, there's also the policy side and the supporting with government. But in terms of knowledge sharing, and I hope and think, part of my role was to bring in some digital thinking. And so that is to be provocative, right? And in a positive way, which is, this is a solvable problem. There are media organisations that are doing this well. So what can we learn? How do we as an organisation bring those voices and people and organisations together to have proactive conversations about what the future looks like?
Do you think the industry is more collaborative than it used to be?
I'm going to say resounding yes.
I remember, this is years and years ago, do you remember the Digital Magazine Awards that Bruce Hudson used to run? That was all for iPad magazines and stuff.
No, I'll say no, because by my accent, I'm not from here. So I'm actually, I was not here. And this is why I say I find it really collaborative, because I've worked in a multinational for a very long time. So having networks across the globe, and then coming into the PPA, the absolute community fostering, sharing knowledge at all scale, like big multinational media organizations, and also like the small independent. There is just so much sharing of knowledge, examples, things we find. I do think it's quite collaborative, and you can see that in the festival.
I mean, back in the day when the iPad was just released, people were not sharing. They were trying to basically steal a march on other people. And I definitely have noticed, I don't know, there's more talking, but there's also more kind of asking questions. We don't quite know how to do this. Has anyone else done it? That kind of thing, which no one would ever admitted in the past that they didn't know how to do something.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that, but there's also definitely keeping trade secrets. I mean, it's not totally sharing everything, right? No, there's a commercial interest at heart within our membership. But I do think that it goes back to what you said, which is like, we've got this problem. Has anyone else tried to explore it? What I love about that, again, kind of semi-showing my age, is that it feels like the 90s again,
right?
When the internet started, and a lot of that experimentation and hacking and trying to solve these problems in real time. That's kind of where we are. Whereas the last 10 years was like very structured. We knew how to work with Google. We knew like what the technologies were. We were optimizing for search. We were optimizing for scale. Well, that's just not the case anymore, right? And there are what the report probably doesn't, and because it was so focused on the consumer and what their behavior is the media publishers actually have two major headwinds. One is this changing of behavior, but the other one is what the platforms and how they're changing algorithms and AI. So we're being stretched on both sides, and trying to tackle that is a massive question, right? So we have to be collaborative if we're going to solve it.
So you mentioned product and technology earlier. Your background is in product development. The report says that product evolution is key. What does that mean? Is that, again, going back to the consumer and then working out?
No, I think I can give it a really simple example. Is what's the role of the future article? So when I am a product background, so I'm biased in this belief because I've worked in product for 25 years and built websites and platforms and apps. And been both upstream and downstream of like the business requirements, right? If you think about it in terms of quite practical, will an article that is driven by a URL exist in the future, right? Because if traffic is decreasing and declining, what our definition of a website looks like will change. And it's all predicated on articles and galleries with a URL that you drive traffic to and you monetize either through advertising, affiliate, subscriptions, right? And a reg wall. The role of product is actually the role of experience. If you're fragmented, so you're on social, you're not building a website if you're in social, right? And if you're on YouTube, your format will be different to what it is on social. So your entire thinking about how you create content and where you put it and what you wrap around it changes. So the role of the website does change. And I've had many, like the one question that I keep, or maybe I'm biased because I might be looking for that question as opposed to also that answer, is talking to loads of media organizations, including newspapers, is what does that look like?
Do you think people in publishing understand what product actually means?
No. But that is also, no. But that is because most organizations don't have product teams.
Yeah.
If you're a small independent, you won't have a product team. You may even outsource, and this is a learning for me, right? Working with a lot of the smaller organizations. You may be outsourcing your tech stack, which actually means that you've never had product in your organization.
Yeah. Okay. So here's your chance. What's the starting point for publishers trying to get their head around product teams, product development, product thinking?
Well, product thinking starts with the customer. I mean, that is, rule 101, and understanding their behavior. We've been working on, and off the back of the report, a little playbook. And this is something that I think in terms of what PPA can really do to help its members is what are the steps within a playbook. That doesn't actually have to be a product person. That could be a strategist. It could be someone from a marketing background. I would differentiate the role of product to product thinking. And that is really key. So if you're thinking about the role of your product, you actually start with the content. What is the content, the story, the programming that you need? And I'll start to use more broadcast language, right? Like if you are a consumer brand and it is that your audiences are on these visual and video first channels, then you might need to change your content mix, both in terms of how it's produced and how it's distributed. If you're B2B, then it might be that your experience shifts to in real life. But within that, you need to understand your customer. You need to understand how you're going to own it. You need to understand what kind of content they want. And then the product thinking comes around how you then create a wrapper. The way that I think about it personally is that you need to decide is this very product language. So you would have in the old days a wireframe with a box. And so you would often just put an image in that box, but you really do now need to think about that box, the story, the video, the podcast, whatever that unit is. How you then wrap around it effectively is your product. That's what's outside the box. That's kind of how I think about it. It can be a role or it can be a program, but it's really key for publishers to find the right partners and to find the right partners who can help them unpack it. And that, I think, is the next question, the next exam question.
Right. Interesting. Oh, I look forward to that one. I think from I've been around technology for almost all my career, going all the way, like you said, going back to the 90s and actually before that. And there was always a separation in the thinking of content and product, content and technology. Even a separation between commercial and product and commercial and technology. And from listening to you and from looking at this report, that's just not going to fly anymore, right? It's this integration thing. And we've been talking about integration again for a long, long time. But it feels like you said, we're at an inflection point. Something has fundamentally changed. And that is a good thing, but it's not necessarily an easy thing.
No, so that's when you take, the kind of technology mindset of test and learn, right? So I agree, and I know I was like nodding vigorously when you were saying that. And I think that if you're also younger, it's probably a little bit more natural for you to blend up different formats. But, I've been working and partnering with some publishers at the moment where we are taking them from a print mindset to digital. And what I mean by that is we're making video content and we're being really scrappy about it. And we are using tools, to kind of create story. We know the stories we want to tell, right? That hasn't actually changed in terms of that the brands, but actually how you create those formats. And we're starting content first has been really incredible. And also to watch the data come in, right, is giving these teams confidence to experiment more, because slowly, but it's working. But that is the role of, that's product, right? Like, if you're on social, you need to know how to make a really good reel. You need to know how to tell a good story. There's a lot that we can learn from print in that,
Yay!
right? Which is ironic, and I think is a beautiful 360 within that kind of story. But I also would say product and technical people need to get closer to content, right? I'll go the other way, which is too many
Yeah.
technology people know nothing about content.
Oh, interesting.
And therefore, that is a challenge, right? Because the really good media organizations really understand storytelling, content, editing. That's really core. Good editors understand the product that they're creating and the formats. But you would have had to if you were a print editor. If you're a print editor, you knew how to lay out a magazine. So the thinking's not different. It's just the formats are, right? That's why I don't want people to get scared, because you just have to change the mindset with all the knowledge that we have just into these new formats.
So, in terms of your advice based on the report and beyond, what would you say? What would you be telling publishers?
Never forget the customer, right? Content is actually before everything. Once you have really good content, so brand, content, and personality, you can monetize it. I don't actually think it's any more complicated than that. And stay true to what you own. I do worry, like, we get distracted by so many conversations around, which we need to, search, technology, data, etc. Let's have a conversation about what good storytelling is, because actually in the world of AI and slop and terrible content, what is actually going to, everyone loves a good story, whether it's B2B, an event, or B2C, and that is curation, that is trusted editorial, right? And it's great content.
There was a couple other things in the report about utility and community, and the trust is obviously huge. Those are all different for different brands, right? So there's no, that playbook you're talking about, it's not one playbook, right? It's a way of approaching your business.
It's a way of approaching business. And that was a really key. This is meant to be a set of ingredients, right? You have to tailor it to ultimately what your consumers want and value. And utility is key. And you're right, definitely, to call it out, as well as community. That's slightly more nuanced. But again, if you know your niche and you know what they value, and it isn't a one-way conversation, then those things will naturally emerge, particularly in the context of in real life events. And the interesting part of that, again, as a designer and a product person, you have to think about your product differently. Just like, it goes back to the role of the article. An article, which is something that you read, that you basically put as many ads that you could within the page, right? It's not how it works these days. If your consumer wants to buy something, if they want to watch something, if they want to gain insights for a recipe or running or any of the utility, how you design for that is very different. So you need to look at adjacent sectors to see how they do that well.
And is the competition with creators or influencers or whatever doing that sort of stuff, is that real? Do we ignore that at our peril?
We are ignoring that at our peril, right? And I will be bold in that. Like, content creators, the really good ones, they are making the same, if not more, money than publishers or broadcasters. They are trusted editorial in the minds of their consumer, whether we like their content or not. And to me, they're independent publishers, right? Some of the best now have magazines, they have websites, they run communities, they run commerce platforms. How is that any different to a legacy media running an advertising, subscription, commerce and events ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like a scrappy startup coming into your market.
Yeah, but I would also say ignore e-commerce at your peril as well, right? If you're an e-commerce and you want to be direct to consumer, and you want to be on social, you have to create video, you have to create stories, right? We are all on the same platform. The consumer does not make the distinction between these old terms of, well, you're a broadcaster, you're news, you're magazine, you're content creator. If I'm on my feed and I'm scrolling, I'm going to be looking at a creator in my feed, a newspaper, a broadcaster. If I'm on YouTube, I'm watching. So it's not the same anymore.
Again, I spoke to someone a couple of weeks ago, a lady called Chloe Comby, who's a futurist, which has got to be the best job title in the world, right? Or maybe the worst. Yeah. And she said, you hear brands, whether it's magazines or newspapers, talking about their 150-year-old's, legacy. A 23-year-old on YouTube could not care less if you have a 100-year-old, 125-year-old brand. I thought that was interesting because that is our starting point.
I challenge that belief.
Go on. I'd like a challenge.
I mean, sure, there'll be a lot of younger audience, but also be a lot of older audience that couldn't care whether or not a magazine is 150 years old. But don't underestimate the certain people who love history, right? And they love knowledge. And just because you're young doesn't mean you don't want to understand background, history, knowledge. I mean, the New Yorker is 100 years old, right, this year. And I think it's fascinating for us to look back at the way it was writing about topics relevant. That's where even AI and history and search and libraries are incredible, right, about what was happening this time 100 years ago. And some young people do care about that, right? One of the other findings of the report, sort of tangential, is that younger people are just as inclined to subscribe, right, if they feel that it's trusted and editorial. I think what you can't do is assume that because you're 100 years old, that ensures your survival, right? Kodak is a good example of that. And you evolve with the industry. But I believe, and maybe it's radical or not, is that digital fatigue will only increase. A desire for privacy will only get more and more acute. And therefore, we won't want to be online all the time. And it doesn't solve all our problems.
I think her point was, you shouldn't take the fact that you've got what you've just said. The fact that you've got this great legacy brand doesn't guarantee you anything. You have to demonstrate what that means. Like New York is a great example. New Yorker's got fact checking, Facebook doesn't. And that's what you have to lean into. It's a history of fact checking, not the fact that it was started in 19 whatever.
And they're embracing new formats. Like I was listening to David Remnick the other day on the Pivot podcast, which is kind of a pseudo competitor in New York because it's run by another media organization, right? But he's fully embracing the different formats, but to a very relevant, brand focused conversation about what's happening in America right now. And The Atlantic is the same. And even, BBC, like any of the big players here are experimenting with these new, I won't even call them new formats, but just the way that we consume content today. But I just don't think trust goes away.
Oh, that's a great line to end it on. Trust doesn't go away. I know people are leaning into trust because it's such an issue, but you finding that they're putting it front and center in the conversations that they're having?
I think the question is more around, what does trust mean? And we got a bit scared because part of that, when I first started at Condé, and it was in the product world, and one of my team members said, like, the thing about editorial that's so incredible is 30% of it's or 40% of it's intuition, and no data report is going to give you the insights that you need. And the tech world wants to optimize its way to everything, right? I will give you the data. It will show you the path to success. The challenge when you get into anything to do with story, it's got to do with intuition as well. That's what makes a good editor. Or good writers or good storytellers. It's not just the editor and the big ivory tower, but those that tell good stories. That's how you create the trust, because you believe them. They're consistent. I mean, I know my go-to people for my podcast because I also just enjoy listening to them. There's a joy factor to it. Trust isn't just, you will tell me what I want to know. I will buy the thing at the price you tell me. There's also joy, right? There's learning. I'm optimistic. It's like, we're editorial, good storytelling. No AI can do that. Not yet. And I still don't believe it ever will.
Thanks so much to Mel for speaking to us. Don't forget we have a write-up of the key learnings from this interview on voices.media, or drop it into your inbox on Tuesday mornings if you sign up to the publisher newsletter, also on voices.media. We'll be back next week with another look at the people and the products powering publishing's future. Until then, keep up with all things Media Voices by following us on LinkedIn and subscribing to the publisher newsletter over on voices.media.